If you have watched my channel enough, you know I am quite fond of the Sega CD. While it had a number of bad games, poor ports, and shovelware, it also was home to a list of killer stuff that I really enjoyed. Despite my admiration, I have no problem admitting that Sega made many mistakes with the platform. If you search for why the Sega CD failed, you get all kinds of opinions and theories, all of which probably contributed to some degree. While that itself is a topic for another time, I'd like to show you something that I noticed during the life of the Sega CD that really bothered me. While none of us should put too much stock in what someone has to say about video games, it would strike me again and again that the gaming media of the time seemed to have it out for Sega's add-on. I mean, I understand it had its issues, but games that deserved notice were slagged off as completely forgettable or simply not covered at all. Worse, Sega CD games were being rated lower than other platforms despite being on par, or in some cases, with noticeable improvements. That leads us to this episode and why I believe that sometimes the gaming media can have a huge influence on public opinion, and it's not always good. Did the Sega CD get done dirty, or do you agree these games just weren't that impressive? Let's take a look. Batman Returns was quite the showpiece when it hit the Sega CD in 1993. Sega basically included two games here. There was the cartridge platformer that was released for the Genesis, and the new driving portions that could be played entirely on their own. Sega even saw fit to add new cinematics and a really good CD soundtrack. Now, I was not a fan of the Genesis original, so I can completely understand not jumping for joy at its inclusion. But come the hell on. Look at these scores from Electronic Gaming Monthly. I mean, the 5s are bad enough, but a damn 4? In no reality is this deserving of that low. Hell, the driving sections alone deserve some praise, and it's barely touched upon by any of these reviewers. The GamePro review is even worse. They actually did a full page on it, and when graphics come up, there's not even a mention of the sprite scaling segments. They just crap on the way the 2D platformer looks. Even some of the Euro Sega mags completely destroy it, calling it a flop and hammering even the driving segments. Thankfully, it wasn't all bad. GameFan recognized the music and scaling additions as a huge plus, and really gave them their due. It was also highly praised by a number of UK-based Sega publications, where the music and driving segments were focused on. This one was interesting though. So many reviewers treated it like a simple Genesis game with a few minor additions. But unlike many of the Sega CD's games, these additions could have stood on their own as an entirely separate experience. These weren't just bonus stages cobbled together. Batman Returns driving segments were unlike anything else at home at the time. They felt and looked like something you'd see in the arcade, and man, that music was fantastic. A freaking 4. Get the hell out of here with that nonsense. I'll be the first person to tell you that the Eternal Champions games were something of an acquired taste. The gameplay and brutal AI took some time to get used to, and I wouldn't blame anyone for stepping away and saying it's not for them. But a game reviewer has got to put in the time and learn what the game is all about. And here, Electronic Gaming Monthly strikes again. The Sega CD version of Eternal Champions had a number of additions and improvements over the Genesis original, and hardly any of them are given voice in these opinions. Basically, the gameplay is no good according to these guys, so the rest isn't even worth mentioning. The thing about Eternal Champions is that it feels nothing like the Street Fighters and Mortal Kombats of its day. You really need to approach it from a clean slate and clear out your expectations. It's got a ton of content to uncover, and the story and characters are actually quite cool. Unfortunately, Electronic Gaming Monthly wasn't the only ones having a go at it. There were also a number of European reviews that just destroyed it as one of the worst fighting games ever made. A harsh critique by any measure. I don't know, it's a shame that opinions on this one are so mixed. Had more reviews praised it for its many positives, like Next Generation magazine did, we may have seen a better overall public opinion of Sega's efforts at the time. Instead, like most things, the divisive nature of Sega fandom was again at play. Of all the reviews you're gonna see in this episode, this one here sticks out in my memory the most. I can still remember every review I'm about to show you, and the feeling of irritation they brought me as a Sega CD owner. Final Fight CD was a great arcade port. It looked and sounded the part, and kept that great two-player co-op. It's what arcade ports should have been at the time of its release. But here comes the hate squad at Electronic Gaming Monthly yet again, and just look at these scores. 2 6 out of 10s. What a joke! And again they question the need of the CD format like it automatically should disqualify it from being an impressive game. What exactly is the CD format supposed to do for gameplay of a beat-em-up that already played great? Why must there be an expectation that the media that a game is on should somehow transform the experience into something you have never played before? The Sega CD wasn't some new technology meant to radically advance game development. It was based on 2D sprites and backgrounds, just like the Genesis and Super Nintendo, so its games were gonna be similar. Final Fight gave us the enhancements you'd expect of early CD titles. The soundtrack was to die for, the animation beautiful, and it had all the content that was cut from the previous cartridge versions. I mean, what more could you have wanted? But what really shocked my balls was the fact that the two guys that rated the Sega CD version the lowest gave the Super Nintendo version higher scores. One of them rated the Sega CD version 2 full points lower. That's right. They complained that the Sega CD added nothing of consequence and yet rated the Super Nintendo release that was missing so much more higher. Let that sink in. The individual Nintendo bias was very real. I threw old Jaguar XJ220 on here because it's one of those games that swings so wildly in review scores, you really don't know what to think. Some reviewers seem to really enjoy the racing action. GamePro praised its graphics, sound, and gameplay in a 2-page spread. Game fans showed their support for it as well. Equally enthusiastic in the opposite direction were a number of other publications like Game Players, who didn't think much of the graphics and sound at all. Even the Sega-focused Mega wasn't impressed, with a number of other UK reviewers agreeing. This kind of variance in opinion didn't do the Sega CD many favors either. Without any sort of real consensus, I think many gamers just didn't pay any attention to the software. It seemed that some Sega CD reviewers expected the device to revolutionize the games industry with new gameplay types completely independent of what we were seeing from the cartridge market. But 16-bit CD games never had the technology to do any of that. They were meant to enhance the game design of the era, not redefine it. I've always said that expectation is a hell of a thing in gaming, and the reviews of some of these Sega CD titles proves that point quite well. Sometimes a Sega CD game would pop up and get hammered so badly, it really surprised me. KO Flying Squadron was one such release. As most of you know, this was a shoot 'em up with very cutesy visuals and an upbeat soundtrack. Apparently, a number of reviewers hated that, because it was absolutely slaughtered by the likes of Next Generation. Good God, man. 2 out of 5 stars and a completely dismissive review they felt deserved no more than a small description. They even added an extra star because it made them laugh. Wow. No doubt old Next Generation wasn't the friendliest towards 2D games at that point, but that's just harsh by any measure. The UK Mega was slightly less harsh, but still rather tough on it, dropping a 6 out of 10 and basically saying it was completely forgettable. Sega Pro was far less kind and didn't play around, dropping a nasty 49% and tearing it apart. A number of other magazines followed the trend, saying it was basically nothing special and not worth your time. Even when KO was applauded, it was often tucked away in a corner, easily missed. Was there an active conspiracy against the Sega CD? Probably not, but man, did little things like that do it no favors at all. In my original script, I did not cover Lords of Thunder. I honestly don't recall it getting bad reviews, but while I was researching KO Flying Squadron, I noticed that Next Generation magazine eviscerated it. No joke, 1 out of 5 stars. Imagine for a moment that a shoot 'em up of this caliber had been released on the Super Nintendo. do you think it received such a ludicrously low score as that? They completely dismiss it as nothing worth playing if you've played anything in the genre before. This score led me to search for other reviews, and sure enough, Lords of Thunder was panned by many other reviewers at the time. Electronic Gaming Monthly gave it 5s and 6s, basically saying the same things as Next Generation. The UK-based Sega Power had a go at it too, basically calling it unnecessary. Curiously, the reviewer praises KO Flying Squadron and dumps on this, a dubious position if I've ever seen one. I think a big problem the Sega CD faced was that many of its better games didn't hit until there were 32-bit consoles on the market, perhaps skewing the expectation of what a CD-ROM based platform should do. But even so, the Super Nintendo went on to perform well when both the Saturn and PlayStation were out, and none of its games were shit on for being tried and true examples of good game design. Can you imagine the outrage if Final Fantasy VI had been reviewed low because it was too much like other Japanese RPGs? Lords of Thunder was excellent game design whether it was a formula you had seen plenty of times before or not. Reviews like this dogged the Sega CD its entire run. The full-motion video game was a bastion for mixed opinions. Some liked them and some hated them. I think a great example of that is Night Trap, the controversial game where you must protect scantily clad women from vampires and their bloodthirsty minions. Electronic Gaming Monthly was a perfect example of how some people really disliked this type of software and others tolerated it much more. And it was like that all over the world. Some absolutely crushed it for its lack of replayability, while others praised its movie quality assets. I think Sega was actually emboldened by this early mix of opinions, basically thinking that they could improve and capture everyone's imaginations with different subject matter. That's why we began to see Hollywood ripoffs on everything from Top Gun to old B-movie kung fu and horror films. Sega and its third parties were under the impression that, like the movies, the subject matter would determine the audience. That wasn't totally wrong in the end, but they forgot that more important than anything, its customers were gamers, and gameplay is what sold hardware. I actually enjoyed old Night Trap here. It was shallow as a puddle, but it took some real strategy to beat it, something other full-motion video games could have used. In the pantheon of great shoot-'em-ups, Musha on the Genesis is considered by many to be one of the best. In that same series, and also developed by Compile, was the Sega CD game Robo Eleste, another vertically scrolling shooter of superb quality. But as you probably guessed, this was not nearly as well received. Things started off bad right from jump in Japan, with Beep Mega Drive dropping middling scores on it as low as 5 out of 10. The French-based Joypad didn't think a whole lot of it either, and even the typically easy-to-please Sega Pro didn't see anything special about it. Things were a touch better in the United States, with Electronic Gaming Monthly giving it 7s and 8s, and GameFan praising it as a great entry into the series. It was a funny thing to see a game you thought was excellent get such a mixed response. Were the expectations out of whack, or were the game types just more prone to a wider variety of opinions? Surely any shoot-'em-up fan that sits down with this title can see in no way, shape, or form is it a 5 out of 10 experience by even the strictest of standards. I preach the understanding of opinions often, but the low scores of this one are a real head-scratcher for me. While many reviewers constantly brought up the Sega CD's lack of innovative games time and time again, those same reviewers lavished no attention at all on Sega CD titles that actually gave us something different. When Snatcher launched, there was nothing like it on the North American market. It was directed towards older gamers at a time when adult otherwise meant ripping the head off your opponent in a fighting game. The story here was deep, the characters interesting, and it glued you to the screen to find out what the heck was really going on. When I saw the review of it in Next Generation, I could not believe what I was seeing. A 3 out of 5 and barely more than a paragraph to say about it. All the times these guys droned on and on about using CD tech for more than just music, and this is all they have to say. They weren't the only ones. Others did virtually the same thing, dismissing the unique story, killer visuals and great sound because it was so different from other story-driven genres at the time. Or in other words, dismissing what made it so unique in the first place. Fortunately, most of the UK and European mags got it right with stellar write-ups, but I still felt bad that some of the bigger guys didn't give it any real time or space for it to get some of the attention it deserved. I guess they figured so few of their readers owned a Sega CD, why bother? Many of the games on the Sega CD were just ports of games that you could already play on the Genesis. When the Terminator launched in 1993, it broke that trend with an entirely new adventure, and a damn good one to boot. And guess what? Few magazines even bothered to review it. And worse, many of the ones that did, particularly the UK-based guys, shit on it. Whether it was Sega Power with its 58%, or Sega Zone with its 65%, or even Mega's proclamation that it was a waste at 67%, the Terminator received so little respect for doing the very thing that so many asked it to do. It had new gameplay, new levels, new music, new bosses. I mean, what did they want of this property exactly? Few US-based reviewers even bothered covering it, but the ones that did were a bit kinder to it. I remember GamePro doing a particularly strong write-up praising it as how Sega CD releases should be done, which mirrored my thoughts exactly. A few other notable scores kept it from being a total shit show, but this one was definitely grossly underrated in my book. It seemed to me that even when some reviewers got what they had been constantly bitching about on the Sega CD, they still didn't want to give it its due. I'd like to end this video with an admission of favoritism. I was a fan of the Sega CD and enjoyed every single game I covered here. I am naturally gonna think that they all should have been seen in a more positive light. But I still can't help but shake this feeling that some people that reviewed games back then looked at the platform completely wrong. Certainly, I do not feel it was unreasonable to expect Sega to make unique titles for the Sega CD, and to criticize them when they failed to do so. But a good game is a good game. As an add-on for the Genesis, it was only capable of so much, and to crush a good game with a bad review because it wasn't wholly unique or did not meet your standards of what a CD-based console should provide struck me as kinda shitty. How can the same game you rated higher all of a sudden get rated lower on the Sega CD when it was clearly superior in a number of ways? Now I want to be clear, I'm not saying this is the reason the Sega CD failed. It had a whole laundry list of problems that did just that, but public opinion is a hell of an important part of Sega's legacy. For a very long time, Sega was seen as a company that could do nothing right, and I do believe there was a Nintendo bias with a lot of the magazines that contributed to that. Whether you agree with that or not doesn't matter, it was still fun to look back and get pissed off at some of my favorite games get rated low by people I've never met. The 16-bit era was a hell of a time, and I loved every minute of it. I'm Sega Lord X, thank you guys for watching, and I will catch you next time.